When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube, welcome back to the Grease Goblin YouTube channel. Today's video, we're going to be continuing our Game of Thrones reread, and today's video we'll be doing Jon V. This is going to be kind of a shorter video, unfortunately, just because this is a very short chapter. It's only about 7 pages long, and yeah, I think Jon is a weird character in this early book because I think definitely compared to a lot of the other POVs, he doesn't really get a lot of book time, or I guess, or page numbers. And he's a character that I think is very small scale compared to a lot of the other characters until we get kind of a little bit later on with his story. But yeah, this is another one of those chapters that it's great for Jon's character arc, but it is one of those chapters that kind of lacks a lot of the I guess tension or things that are going on in the world, right? Where we have the Catelyn and Tyrion plot being intertwined. We have Ned getting very close to discovering the truth about Cersei and Jaime. We have Dany, who's really starting to kick up, right? Becoming even more and more powerful, and her relationship with Viserys kind of tearing apart a bit. And we have Jon, where it's just like, he's just kind of here for a little while until things start to really get going. But we're going to start here on page 444. Alliser Thorne starts by saying that the recruits are utterly useless and should be shoveling, not doing swordplay. But the new recruits are coming up from the King's Road, and so Thorne needs to send 8 recruits forward. Again, just makes sense, right? If you're getting more recruits, it's time to send some others on, even if Thorne doesn't like it, because you can't keep everyone as a recruit for everyone forever, even if that's what Thorne would like. He reads out the names of those moving on, which he has made an awful nickname for all of them. Jon, last being named the Bastard, of course. Not very creative, but it is what it is. And all of these people are pretty much the people that Jon has come up with. A lot of his friends, the people that he's been helping, they are the ones moving on. But someone is not named here. Samwell Tarly. It's something that Jon does not really pick up on instantly and all of that, but it's going to be a pivotal point of this chapter. It's really the entire kind of point of this chapter. There's some other stuff in here as well, but the main overarching one is what is going to happen to Sam. Pip gives out a whoop and thrusting his sword in excitement, and a thorn shoots him down, saying they will call themselves men of the Night's Watch, but they are still boys and extremely green. When winter comes, they will die like flies. And at this, Thorne takes his leave. I will say, right, Thorne is not necessarily wrong in the idea that they are all still really green. These are all some young men, a lot of them under the age of 18. These are people that have not seen any type of real combat. They have not been north of the wall. They are still pretty green. So I will give Thorne the credit of that idea that, yes, they are still green, but they're going to be green until you give them some scenario to toughen up, to become more mature. The other boys then begin congratulating those who are moving forward. Halder smacks Toad with the flat of his sword in jest. Pip hops on Gren's back and the two go wrestling down. Even Daron goes and gets some wine. It really shows, again, the bond that a lot of these men have created, and very different, again, than when Jon got here. So again, just more development into how these men have kind of unified as a group. But this also shows that, and that will kind of get us a new page 445, when Jon kind of notes that something seems wrong. Jon notes Sam is all by himself, and Jon offers him the wine, but Sam says he does not want it, and Jon asks if he is okay. Jon notes that Samwell lies as he says he is well, truly, and that he is happy for them, and that Jon will be the first ranger like Benjen was. Again, we're going to see Jon defending that Benjen is not dead and that he still is the first ranger. But more importantly, a couple of things to pick up on here. One is that Jon, again, is someone that's pretty decent at looking at facial recognition and kind of understanding what people are, you know, going through or whatnot, or when they're lying to him. Something he kind of gets from Ned a bit, but again, playing on that kind of the quiet wolf persona type thing. But also, it's kind of noted here, like, Sam is off by himself, where Sam does feel a part of the group, but Sam is smart enough, he's one of the smarter people here, that understands what that means. You know, all the people that were protecting him, his friends, are now going to be sent, you know, whether that's to Eastwatch, Shadow Tower, are going to have their own duties at the castle, which is something that Jon is going to think about later on in this chapter. Jon still, again, is not accepting Benjen's death, noting that he is still the first ranger. But before Jon could say any more, Halder calls if he is going to drink it all, and the group begins fighting over the wine. Others begin throwing snowballs at them, but by this time, Jon had come to his senses. Sam was gone. That night, Three-Finger Hob had cooked them a lavish meal in celebration of them becoming Night's Watchmen, a meal of lamb and buttered turnips, and was brought to them by the Lord Steward himself. They were congratulated by the older men, slapping them on the back. Bowen Marsh continues stating that this is from the Lord Commander's own table, and there were even more greens and frozen blueberries with cream. I would say this is probably one of the best food descriptions this early in the books, and I can really tell that George was hungry when he wrote this chapter. Pip then wonders if they will keep them together, and Toad notes he hopes not. He does not want to see more of Pip's face. Pip fires back, saying Toad is sure to be a ranger. He can scare Mance with his face. Again, just more of this nice bonding and jesting, showing that these people really are true friends. But something else I really want to point out, like how important becoming a Night's Watchman is. I think if you're an older Night's Watchman, you realize what a lot of these men are giving up, even if, some of them are, sent here because they are criminals. This is a big deal. You're committing your life to this order. This is your life now, right? You're now basically family, and that's shown by how good of a meal this is. Like, I don't think, the Night's Watchmen get this good of a meal very often at all, right? This might be one of the best meals they eat for the rest of their lives, which is kind of a really sad thought when you kind of think about it. But that gets us into page 446. Quietly and seriously, Gren notes that he would like to be a ranger, and Mathar notes you and everyone else, which is an interesting sentiment because it's like the rangers really are what you strive to be. They're the one that get all the, I guess, glory, recognition. It's kind of, again, this green boy thing where it's like the rangers have a very difficult duty and they're most susceptible to dying. You go north of the wall, you could be captured by wildlings, or you could be tortured, or you could just, it's a rough life, right? You're living outdoors and outside in the cold north of the wall a lot of times, and it's not an easy life. So when you do hear this sentiment that a lot of people want to be rangers, it's weird considering what a lot of rangers go through. And even when we're looking at right now, where it's like Benjen is the best ranger on the wall, and yet he's gone missing. It shows you just how difficult it is to be a ranger. But Mathar continues that everyone who took the black swore to defend the wall, but the rangers are the true heart of the wall, as they went past the wall fighting wildlings, giants, and monstrous snow bears. Hopefully we see some snow bears. That'd be pretty cool. This is kind of what we got in season 7, but hopefully we get it more of that, I guess. Halder refused to, saying that it is the builders for me, and notes what would the rangers be if the wall fell down, which is a great point, right? Then I think that's something that's like everyone is useful, right? You can't have this society work unless there are people like the builders, like the stewards and things. And that's something that Jon is really going to take to heart when he talks to Aemon later on and is trying to convince him about Sam kind of being a steward and helping Aemon. But I think that's a good moment where Jon can kind of connect all these dots for what he's going to say later. Jon then thinks that the builders had many responsibilities in older times when they had many more prominent numbers. They would fix towers and keeps, crush the stone for the footpaths, repair the wall wherever they could, cut down the trees that got too close to the wall, and lastly it was said once they had been responsible for elevating the wall even higher, which is insane because it's like, why would you need this wall to get higher? It's already so tall. Like, what do you expect is going to be a threat to it? Now, again, people climbing the wall, but at that point, it's like, what is going to, making it a little higher going to do for people climbing it? I don't know. It does seem kind of like a waste of manpower to me, but I guess if they're bored, have got nothing else to do. But it really just shows you how far the Night's Watch has fallen, right? Like, we've already kind of been told that the trees are getting pretty close to the wall, and this is not the case with the wall, right? There's a lot of issues that we're having. We're not able to repair even all of Castle Black, let alone the entire wall. And that's something that Jon is also going to note here, but he knows that the job was more limited now, and walking the walls, looking for any cracks or things they could repair. Daeron notes the old bear is no fool, and that Halder is sure to be a builder, and that Jon will be a ranger. He is the best sword and rider that we have, and his uncle was first ranger. And then Daeron stops. Again, this is now the second time that we've seen someone saying that Benjen is dead. And at this, Jon again reinforces that Benjen is still the first ranger. Again, Jon is just not willing to accept the fact that Benjen is dead, and I think, if I'm any of these men around Jon, I would probably be slipping up too. I think it's probably a foregone conclusion Benjen is dead, given given what they've heard, given the history of the Rangers. This kind of stuff just, happens a lot. And especially now where more and more Rangers are going missing, it's just not uncommon at this point. At this, Jon seems upset by this being brought up again and thinking on Sam not being here. And he decides that he is done eating. Jon then grabs his cloak and heads out, with Pip following him. Again, I think there's a lot of things playing on Jon's mind, not just this idea that Benjen could be dead and it gets brought up again. It's just, it probably, when that got brought up, it's, okay, wait, Sam said kind of something earlier today, but Sam's not here, and kind of figuring out and piecing everything together. But that gets us into page 447. Pip asks what is wrong, and Jon admits he is worried about Sam and how he was not at the table. Pip says it is not like him to miss a meal. Maybe he is ill. Jon notes this is not the case, that they are leaving him. Some of them will go to Eastwatch or Shadow Tower, and they will now have duties and little time for Sam. Jon remembers all of his goodbyes from Winterfell and starts to fully understand Sam's situation. Sam will be kept with the likes of Ras and who knows on the new recruits, and Thorne is sure to send the new ones on Sam, and who knows how long he will survive. Again, it's Jon being very smart to understand why Sam is feeling this way, because he has felt a lot like that after, leaving Winterfell, leaving everything that he knows behind. And for Sam, it's even worse because Sam, it's almost a death sentence, right? All of his friends moving on. Sam sees this. He's, very clever and smart, and he understands that. And so Jon, in his mind now, is like, how do I get my friend out of this situation? But also, it kind of points to this idea that the Night's Watch and the recruit system really feels like, high school, or whatever schooling you have, where it's like you don't have a lot of responsibilities. You're just with your friends, and, you are learning things, but, you have a lot more downtime to create a lot of those relationships. But, when you grow older and you go into, whether it's the workplace or higher education, a lot of those friends that you might have had, you start having less and less time with those people because of, maybe working a full-time job, trying to support, someone around you or whatever. But think about that with the Night's Watch. You have a lot of responsibilities. The Night's Watch is undermanned. They are going to work you quite a lot because of that problem. Pip grimaces, noting that Jon did all he could. Jon notes that it is not good enough. Restlessness was on Jon as he walked back to Hardened Tower to get Ghost. As he went to the stables with Ghost, many of the horses reined away, but Jon mounted his horse and rode out with no destination in mind. Again, we see Jon do this quite a few times, right? There's I think the most famous moment for this is when Stannis offers to make Jon Stark. This is something Jon does as well. So I really do like this commonality that Jon just wants to go and have some peace. And I really relate to this a lot because I made a video on this channel that's very important to me that, talked about a lot of my journey with, mental health issues. And this is something that I did that was very similar. I would go to my local park and I would do a lot of this, right? Just, walking and thinking, and, I'd read A Song of Ice and Fire, about a chapter a day there. And I really relate a lot to how kind of Jon is working through his issues here. But Jon let Ghost go, he needed to hunt. Jon thinks on how once he takes his oath, the rest of the world will be gone to him forever. Because again, that's the other idea, is like, not only is he having this issue with Sam, he doesn't know what to do with one of his friends that he's become very close with. He's also now having to deal with, does he really want to commit his life to the Night's Watch? There's no one going back. Once he takes this oath, his life, for seeing the rest of the world is over. Jon also notes that he had a longing for Winterfell, or to explore the parts of the world. Places like Dorne, places like King's Landing. He's unlikely to see any of those places if he takes the vow. Jon notes that he was not an outlaw or a criminal. He was not bound to the Watch yet, like so many others were. If he stayed, he would be there till he was old as Aemon, if he even lived that long. But Jon could leave it behind and go back to Winterfell to see his brothers. And yeah, you come to a really tough crossroads, because Jon is a very young man, and he's having to think, like, I'm giving up so much. And it's something that I think goes back to Benjen's line, you don't know what you're giving up. And I kind of think Jon is kind of coming to that realization as we're getting closer to him taking his vow, where he's never going to experience all these things because of this vow. And that's something he's going to have to rationalize through what he's going to do. And now we get a very interesting moment here with Jon that correlates really well with not only the last chapter with Catelyn, but the chapter before with the Tower of Joy. But we get this idea in that chapter on the Tower of Joy and a lot with Lyanna. But we also got, again, in the chapter, right before with Catelyn, we got about how Catelyn, was dealing with her children and things like that. A lot of foreshadowing to her inevitable outcome. And that kind of correlates within Jon. Both of these things conflict in his head. Or in another voice in his head, Catelyn tells him they are his half-brothers, and there is no place for him in Winterfell, or King's Landing, or anywhere. But this also sparks Jon to think of his mother. Who was his mother? And that even she had no place for him, which is a really sad thought to think about, right? And I really can, understand Jon's thought process here, because it's like Jon has never met his mother. He doesn't know who his mother is. And if that's the case, Jon's mother didn't care about him, didn't want him. When in reality, if you're someone that believes R+L like me, Jon was the thing that Lyanna cared about the most, making Ned swear a vow to protect him. So it's a really nice, just sentiment there when you think about everything going on and how Jon actually has probably the wrong of this. Even if you believe it's like a Shar or something, I would assume that's actually true as well. And then Jon thinks, was she a whore or a camp follower, or some fool or something else dishonorable? Why else was Ned so ashamed to speak of her? Again, that's a whole different subject, because it's like, you know who Ned is, right? Ned wouldn't go with a whore. He wouldn't go with a camp follower or some fool. So why doesn't Ned speak of her? That's a great idea here for Jon to kind of think about. And it, something just doesn't really add up there. But again, I want to go back to the Catelyn part of this as well. It's this constant idea that, Catelyn is the person that really pushed Jon to make this decision. Because Catelyn never treated Jon like a kid, or like maybe not even a son, but someone that wasn't awful. Like someone that wasn't a stain on Catelyn's relationship with Ned. And we understand why Catelyn feels that way, but Jon is innocent. Jon had nothing to do with those things. And it's now pushed Jon to make a vow of basically giving up his life. I think that speaks volumes to me of how Catelyn and Jon's relationship was. But Jon turns away from the King's Road, looking at the wall and at the fires that are still going on at Castle Black, and he turns back. Ghost returns with blood on his mouth, presumably making a fresh kill. And Jon also notes the Lord Commander's fires still going as he heads to the stable, as he knows what he must do. Maester Aemon's apartments were below the rookery in a wooden keep in which he lived with two others as he was extremely frail. Jon notes that the two men who helped Aemon were Chet and Clytus, two men who were considered the ugliest men at the wall, which is really interesting given that Aemon is blind. There's a nice little joke that George puts in here where it's like, yeah, they were put with Aemon, so Aemon basically, he couldn't see them, so they'd be okay. It's a really interesting line that I thought was just like, George, I don't know what came into your head to make that up, but you're a very creative guy. That's all I'm going to say. But as Jon reaches the door, it is Chet who answers, and Jon says he needs to speak with Aemon. Chet notes that the Maester is abed as Jon should be, and to come back in the morning, and goes to close the door. But Jon is not going to be stopped. He keeps it open with his boot and says the morning will be too late. Chet notes Aemon is not accustomed to being awoken in the night. He is old and frail. Jon says he is old enough to have better manners than Chet and to give Aemon his apologies. He would not do it unless it was important. Again, I think everyone in this moment understands why Jon is like coming to Aemon, but at the same time, like, is Chet wrong? Like, this is the middle of the night, and Aemon again is really old. Like, probably doesn't need to be disturbed. And what could it possibly be that you can't wait until morning? You know, I do sympathize with Chet here a little bit, even though I know why Jon's doing this, and it is very important. But just given the other side of that, it does kind of make sense. But that gets us into page 449. Chet asks, what if he refuses? Jon says he can stand here all night, and Chet begrudgingly allows him in and to wait in the library and to start a fire, as Aemon does not need to get a chill. By the time Aemon came in, Jon had a roaring fire going, and Jon notes Aemon in his bathrobes with his chains about his neck, even in sleep, as a maester did not take his chains off. And so I also want to point towards the idea of Aemon, right? Because Aemon is someone that kind of is almost in two different vows for life. The Night's Watch and also being the Maester here. So again, I think that's really interesting. Is like when we get to later on when, you know, Aemon talks to Jon about this idea of, you know, he watched his whole family die too. It's even double because Aemon was kind of sworn to two different things outside of his family. But Aemon wants to be sat near the fire, and so Chet brings him to the chair and goes to stand by the door. Now, you could also point to this being a little bit more foreshadowing to Aemon being a Targaryen as he likes the fire. But, I mean, at Aemon's age, it's extremely cold here. I can't really blame Aemon, if you want me to be honest. Jon apologizes for waking Aemon, but Aemon says he was not sleeping, and as he grows older, the less sleep he needs. Aemon notes how he is very old and that half the night he spends with memories 50 years older, and a visitor in the night is most welcome distraction. Now, I want to take this from a couple angles here, right? One, I think this is just inherently true when you get older, and especially when you're Aemon's age, where you reflect on your younger self, the people you used to know, things that happened in your past, of maybe a longing to go back as you kind of slip into being older. You know, you can't do things as well, and you're just not able to physically do the things maybe you enjoyed when you were younger. And also, I think especially in Aemon's case, where he's lived so long that he's outlived really everyone that he knew, it's a hard thing to do. You know, I think there's always this idea where it's like the worst thing you want to be is the last one alive out of like your friend group or your family. And that's basically where Aemon is. And it gets even worse because Aemon is blind, right? Aemon can't see, so there's nothing to distract him from all of these memories that he, you know, when he could see. So I think it's just a double-edged sword because Maester Aemon in a lot of ways is a truly tragic character. Jon asks for Sam to be taken out of training, to be taken into the Night's Watch. Chet then pipes up saying that is no concern of Aemon's, which is correct, right? Chet, again, is correct, right? I think a lot of this is, you know, we know what Chet is going to do later in the story, and Chet very much comes off as the antagonist against Jon, but I think Chet, like, for the average Night's Watchman, comes off very reasonable in this chapter. Aemon continues lightly, saying that it is Thorne's job to train the recruits and pass them through. Why come to him? Well, Jon simply says that the Lord Commander listens to him, and that you are in charge of the sick and wounded. And Aemon asks if his friend is sick or wounded, and Jon says he will be unless you help. Which, again, nice little clever line there from Jon. He told them all of it, even the part about Rast being threatened with Ghost, and how Sam is terrible with a sword, and it was only a matter of time before he was hurt or killed. Which I think is another reason why Aemon is willing to listen to Jon so much, because of how honest Jon is, right? Things that Jon is saying, right? Threatening another Night's Watchman. It's not something you just go around telling people. It doesn't give you a great look, even though I think a lot of people probably know that, just given off the behavior of someone like Rast. But that'll get us into page 450. And Chet at this could not stomach anymore, and he states that he has seen the boy in the hall. He is a pig and a hopeless craven if what Jon has said is correct. Aemon says maybe this is so, but what would Chet have them do with him? Chet says the wall is no place for the weak and to let him train for years until he is ready or dies. Now, I think the way you could really look at this is think about an army, right? There's always this common idea that you are only as strong as the men around you. And I think that's kind of the approach that a lot of people look at when they look at Sam. They don't see what Sam's value could be. And so when you think about it, it's like if you're having to rely on Sam to keep you alive, most people are not going to do that, right? And that, I think, is the issue for someone like Chet, where it's like, why should this guy be allowed in when he's not, he doesn't have any courage. He's not physically capable to be someone of the Night's Watch. And I think Aemon even comes to a better point, though. Like, what do we do with him if he's not? What do we do with this? We can't just kill him. We need every guy we can. I think Aemon already knows that, but he's going to wait to see what Jon's rationalization is. Jon says that is stupid, and taking a moment to collect himself, says that once Maester Luwin had told him why Maesters wear their chains. Aemon tells him to continue while he fingers his own chains. Jon says the chains are meant to remind them of the realm that they serve, which again is very interesting, because once again, that doesn't mean to serve their lords or their kings. It's the realm. That doesn't hold them with any loyalty to any lord, anyone. Again, that's just another reason why I think the Maester conspiracy is so interesting, because it's now, I think, the second or third time that this has been brought up throughout this first book. Like, what does that mean, right? That's very subjective. What is right for the realm? Varys is someone that champions this idea, what is right for the people and what is right for the realm. That's very subjective, right? Varys has a lot of actions that don't seem to go towards that goal. And I think the Maesters, in a lot of ways, are no different in that. I'm not saying all of them are bad, but intrinsically, what does that mean? People can take that so many different ways. Jon continues asking Luwin why not make his chains silver? It would go better with his robes. Luwin notes that the chains were given after their study. Gold for money and accounts, silver after healing, iron for warcraft, and etc. Jon then applies this to the realm. It is made up of many chains, gold for lords, steel for knights, but many others like tin, copper, and things of that nature, aluminum, making up others like farmers and smiths. As a land needs many sorts of people, and this is extremely clever thinking from Jon, he applies it to something that Aemon is going to be very close to and understand, while also getting it to his point. And Aemon kind of understands this right away. He smiles and asks, so, basically saying, so what? Jon finishes by saying the wall needs all sorts of people too. Or why else have the builders, the stewards, and the rangers? And Jon is 100% correct, right? You can find value in every single person that comes to the wall. They don't all have to be fighters, right? Think about what we learn with Halder, right? He is someone that wants to be a builder, but yet, of all of the people here, outside of maybe Gren, he was someone that had a lot of, he was someone that could have been a pretty good fighter. He was really big and muscular. He kind of had that build to him. And yet, he's not that. He's a builder. He's not a ranger. And to me, I think that really points to that idea really nicely. Jon continues saying, Randall Tarley cannot make Sam a warrior, and neither will Thorne. Why not allow Sam to be a steward? And this is true. Like, if Sam, with, again, all of these highborn lords, these master of arms, could not make Sam a warrior, what makes you think Thorne is? Thorne is a subpar master of arms. I 100% agree with Jon's sentiment there. But Chet once again is angry by this, asking if Jon thinks it's easy and that no cowards are stewards. They have to do all the everyday work, hunting, making clothes, tending horses, milking cows, gathering firewood, and preparing meals. Now, I will say, I don't know what that has to do with being a coward, because intrinsically, all of those things don't really take a lot of bravery, like just gathering wood, milking a cow, making a meal, making clothes. None of those really take a lot of bravery. So this is where I think Chet is kind of being blinded by his hatred of Sam. But that'll move us into page 451. So moving in, Aemon responds a bit more gently, asking if Sam can hunt. Jon admits he hates hunting, and Aemon again follows up asking if he can plow a field or sail a ship or even butcher a cow, and Jon once again admits he cannot. So at this point, you're sitting here like, what can Sam do? And Chet even continues giving a nasty laugh and says that he has seen the little lordlings put to work before, and they always do bad and hurt themselves. Which again, I think you see a little bit of Chet's bias come in, right? Chet is not someone of high birth or that grew up, you know, rich. And I can definitely see where he's coming from there. So again, I think it is Chet's bias and his hatred of higher lords and cowards and things, but I definitely can see where he's coming from. Jon says he knows one thing Sam can do better than anyone. Aemon prompts him to continue. Jon makes the case that Sam could help him. Sam can read better than anyone, as Chet cannot read, and Clytus's eyes are getting worse. Sam can manage accounts, and he is good with the ravens as animals like him. Again, Ghost took a liking to him right away. The Night's Watch needs every man, and why kill him? It is a waste. So now it's going to get even more personal for Chet, because now Jon is implying that Sam should straight up take Chet's position more or less, right? Like, given the situation, like, Sam can realistically do everything that Chet can do, but better. Maester Aemon closes his eyes to think for a little and finally says that Jon's mind is as sharp as his blade, it would seem. Jon then asks if that means what is cut off. Aemon says he will think on it, on what he has said, and now he is ready to sleep, and for Chet to show Jon out. So that is the end of the chapter. Again, like I said, a very short chapter, but it's a good one. I think in the grand scale of this first book, because I think this is my issue, right? I've been ranking all these chapters and trying to give them a score. And what I've kind of come to realize is that this first book just has a very high consistently level, where I think a lot of the other books, right, you'll have your really good chapters, you'll have your like kind of more filler chapters, your not so good chapters. This book is consistently of a very high quality. And so a chapter like this, where it's a shorter chapter, there's not a ton going on, there's some good character work for like Jon, for instance, and an introduction to Aemon. It inherently has a lot lower stakes than the rest of the chapter. So for instance, this chapter I think is rated like in the bottom like quarter of chapters for me. But yeah, no, I'd love to see what your guys' thoughts are on this, because it's a great mini chapter here for Jon, but I do feel like it needed something extra. But I don't know. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll get you all. And I will see you guys all in the next video or live stream.